Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Public Policy, where today we are doing Section 13, which is all about policy evaluation. In other words, we've implemented these new policies. What effects are those policies actually having? Now, once we implement any policy, whether it's a crime policy or a housing policy or a business regulation policy, we want to know whether our policy worked, for one thing, but that can be difficult because people define whether something worked or not differently, right? If our intention is to help children in poverty, well, if we increase their parents' income by 10%, is that a success? If we do reduce child poverty by 5%, is that a success, or do we need to reach a 25 or 50% goal before it becomes a success and we could say that that policy worked, right? And whether it worked or not, we want to know how much it cost, both direct costs and other indirect costs. And then, can it be improved? Is there a way to take this policy and say, turn a 10% reduction in childhood poverty into a 20% reduction in childhood poverty or whatever, right? So these are common questions that we ask when we're evaluating policies and what kind of actual real world impact that they had, all right? So who does this? Who does policy evaluation? Well, the short answer is lots of people. The one I am most familiar with as a university professor is universities. Universities, the professors who are employed by universities do research as one of their primary employment requirements, right? And depending on what kind of university and what field you're in, there will be different research requirements for that position. Some universities hire professors that focus almost exclusively on research. Other universities want you to do other things, and research is kind of a additional bonus thing that you can do. And a lot of that research that university professors do is focused on some kind of policy evaluation. In the field of criminal justice, that might be, everything from the death penalty to drug control policy to immigration policy to, policies designed to reduce vandalism or prostitution or whatever. There are also kind of private research organizations that are commonly called think tanks. There are many of these all around the world. Some of them have fairly strong political leanings, and their kind of either stated or unstated goal is to advance the cause of some political movement. Others are just there for the research and they don't have any kind of ulterior political motive. The news media will sometimes do some kind of policy evaluation by, in their search to report on a story, they might try to find some data and do their own kind of analysis of what that says. When it comes to legal policies and Congress passing laws to try to help the people of the country, Congress can do their own policy evaluations or more commonly hire some outside firm to do a policy evaluation. The GAO is the Government Accountability Office, and they do lots and lots of policy evaluations for how different policies set by the government have affected the people it was designed to affect. There are presidential commissions, so if the president wants to know the effects of some policy, they can form a kind of an ad hoc commission to investigate and determine what effects different policies have had. And then, of course, federal agencies do their own policy evaluations all the time, right? So The Environmental Protection Agency might pass a new regulation designed to reduce the amount of a certain chemical in a certain river, and they need to know whether that policy has actually reduced that amount of that chemical in that river. So they might send some researchers out to go measure the amount of that chemical, right? And these policy evaluations can be everything from something incredibly simple, just requiring, an Excel spreadsheet and some time entering data, all the way up to big, gigantic, complicated, multi-million-dollar research studies involving numerous researchers and years worth of data. Now, when we're talking about policy evaluation, we need to distinguish between outputs and outcomes. These are often confused because they both begin with out, right? But they are distinctly different. Outputs are the changes that have been made, right? These are the things that we have at the end of the policy implementation process. So if we have a policy to train police to de-escalate confrontations with suspects and defendants, the output would be the number of trained officers and how they're trained and what they're trained to do and all those things. The outcomes are the results. Okay, so that training, how does that affect use of force incidents over the following 2 years, right? So that's the results of the policy, the effects of the policy, the actual change in behavior that we were trying to change, not, and again, as distinguished from the things we did to get there, which are the outputs, all right? Now, there are lots of different effects of policies, right? With any given policy, we have a target population, right? So reducing childhood poverty, our target population would be children living in poverty in the jurisdiction we're talking about. If it's a national program, then it would be all the children in the country living in poverty. The policy is going to have, hopefully, the intended effect on that target population of reducing childhood poverty. A training program to reduce police brutality is hopefully going to have the intended effect of actually reducing police brutality. All policies are going to have some kind of unintended effects as well, right? So, reduction in childhood poverty might have a positive unintended effect of increasing the educational attainment of children who were formerly in poverty, or it might have the unintended effect of increasing the work output and educational attainment of parents who have children living in poverty. So, while the intended effect is we want to reduce childhood poverty, we want to reduce officer use of force incidents, we want to reduce the population of prisons and jails in this state, whatever. That can also have unintended effects that can be either positive or negative, but they are a clear and direct result of our actions in trying to do whatever it was that policy was trying to do. The third kind of effects are called externalities or spillover effects. These are similar to unintended effects, but they affect people or organizations or communities outside of that target population, right? So if we have a certain county and we want to have an anti-drug task force that really goes after drug dealing and drug using in that county, the intended effects is reduced drug use in that county. And let's say it's a really successful program and drug selling and drug sales and drug use and drug trafficking drops by 50% in that county. Great. The externality to that might be that some other crime rises in the county because our police in our county are spending so much time focusing on drugs that they're not focusing on these other things. Or maybe the drug crime just shifts over to the neighboring county, right? That would be an externality. We're not necessarily reducing the total amount of drug crime, we're just shoving it over geographically. We also have to worry about current and future effects. Sometimes the effect of policy is seen immediately. Sometimes the effects of policy is going to be years or decades down the road, right? If we want to improve long-term education and college graduation rates by implementing universal pre-kindergarten classes, that's an effect that we're not going to see for maybe 20 years, if at all, right? And sometimes there's both. Sometimes there's immediate effects, sometimes there's more long-term effects, and sometimes there's really long-term effects, and they might all be positive, they might all be negative, they might be a mixture of positive and negative, right? And it can be difficult to distinguish and to kind of figure out whether, if we're only looking at a 2-year period, we might see some effect of this policy, but if we keep it going long term, or if we keep the analysis going long term, we might see even better results, or we might see worse results or no results at all, right? So you have to worry about not just the short-term effects, but the long-term effects as well. And then, of course, there's symbolic effects. And symbolic effects are things that don't have any kind of tangible, measurable effect directly, but they still might be important. So, for instance, something like a Memorial Day parade in your city. There are no real direct benefits to having a Memorial Day parade. It doesn't really make the city any money. It doesn't employ people in any long-term way. But it has a symbolic effect. It's an important cultural and sociological action or tradition or ritual that gives people a sense of thankfulness and belonging and helps create a cohesive community. So that is not like a direct measurable thing. It's just kind of symbolic, and that doesn't necessarily mean unimportant. Okay? Now, not only do we have to determine the effects of any given policy, we also have to determine the costs, right? So, when we're talking about costs, usually, especially with government policy, we're talking about direct economic costs, right? We want to reduce drug use in this county. It costs us $10 million to implement this program, right? We want to talk about taxpayer dollars. But there's also, human life costs, health costs, happiness costs, time costs. There are all kinds of different costs. Some of those costs are going to be direct. We want to hire more police officers for this city. Well, the direct costs will be, such and such amount for their salary, such and such amount for their pension as a long-term cost, such and such amount for recruitment drives, such and such amount for equipment. Then there might also be indirect costs. In other words, if we want to hire a bunch of people to be police officers, the direct costs are going to be the cost of their salary and their training and all those things. The indirect costs might be the fact that those people aren't taking other jobs, or if we lower our standards to hire more people, the indirect cost might be an increase in police police misconduct lawsuits over the following 5, 10, 15 years, right? Which we didn't think about when we were first lowering our standards to increase our hiring. Then there's opportunity costs. And opportunity costs refer to what else could we have done? Because we only have so much money, but we also only have so much time, only so many people, only so many hours in the day, etc., etc. And we have to kind of choose what to do with that money and with that time and with that effort. And so opportunity costs means if we're choosing to do this policy, that means we don't have the money or the time to do this other policy that we could have, right? So if we want to spend our money on a domestic violence reduction program, we're going to, use our facilities and our mental health counselors and our money and all these things to build a new domestic violence training program, domestic violence rehabilitation center for battered women, and teaching anger management to men accused or convicted of domestic violence. Great, but that means we don't have the money, and now we no longer have the physical facility, and we no longer have the mental health care professionals that we could have used to do, say, drug treatment, right? The fact that we did that domestic violence program has an opportunity cost of, well, that means we didn't do this other drug treatment program because we had to choose kind of one or the other, right? So that's an opportunity cost. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next half.